My name is Krystal. I was 18 years old and recently accepted to Union College in New York. The college is located in Schenectady, which is just outside New York's capital, Albany. I was excited about starting my first year of college and stepping out on my own, but also nervous because I was born and raised in a small Midwestern town. I was really close with my family, which included 2 younger siblings, who, I felt, saw me as a role model being as I was the eldest. After attending college visits, having gone through orientation, and moving into my dorm, I honestly just wanted to get started with classes and continue what was familiar in my young adult life, studying. Because this was my first year on campus, I stayed in the Freshmen dorms. I had a room to myself, which I loved, but shared a common area, kitchen, and bathrooms. I had 3 housemates, each also having their own rooms. I remember feeling so great the first night I finally got to sleep in my room. A few days passed, and the semester classes had officially started. Right away, I was getting hit with assignments. I was arranging the desk in my room and organizing all the folders and materials I needed for class now that I had a more firm grasp on what to expect the next coming months. That night, the first night after classes had started, I remember waking up from a horrific nightmare. There's no way I can explain with words how to describe it, but what I can say is I was sweating upon waking up. The next day, I again had the first day of many of my classes. I was grabbing lunch in the dining hall with one of my housemates, Elijah. He had a similar major and shared 2 classes. We were chatting about our first impressions. As he was talking, while him being in front of me, I had looked just past his shoulder for a moment. I saw a strange-looking reflection in a window 10 feet away. It looked to be a girl standing there in what I can best explain, in the window. It wasn't a reflection, nor was it outside, as we were on the 2nd floor. "Hey, are you okay, Krystal?" Elijah asked. Refocusing my attention back to him, I apologized and assured Elijah, "Yeah, I'm okay. Just distracted, I guess, with all the changes." He nodded understandingly, offering a supportive smile. Briefly glancing back at the window, I noticed the figure was no longer there. Later that night, after hanging out in the common area with my housemates for a bit, I felt ready again to tackle hours of studying. So I went back to my room and did just that. Engrossed in my studying and tuned into the music, I noticed a subtle shift in the corner of my eye by the window. I peered over. I saw something fade from the window. Immediately, my mind revisited what I had witnessed in the dining hall earlier. I took a deep breath and continued on with my studies. In the course of that night, I was awakened once more, but this time, not by a nightmare, at least as far as I can recall. Rather, it was the sound of a knock. I looked around in the darkness, but didn't see nor hear anything. Shortly after, it came back, this time a series of knocks. The sound seemed to originate from the desk. Getting to my feet, I switched on the light and scanned the room. Nothing. I strained to hear the noise again, but there was only silence. Opening my bedroom door, I took a quick look into the common area. It was dark, and with everyone sleeping in their respective rooms. A sense of dread crawled over me, as if something ominous lurked over my shoulders. Despite the eerie feeling, I did my best to dismiss it and drift back into slumber. The next day unfolded quite normally, and I began to feel somewhat better after being thoroughly creeped out from the night before. I had arranged to meet up with Elijah for a meal before calling it a night. We headed to one of the many campus food halls, and while everything appeared normal, the memory of the odd incidents from the days prior still lingered in the back of my mind. Upon returning to my dorm room, a feeling of hesitation crept in. Taking a deep breath, I reminded myself everything was fine. I just had to do some last-minute studying before bedtime. I retrieved my books from my bag, placed them on the desk, and got down to work. The next thing I recall was realizing that 30 minutes had passed, and I found myself staring blankly at an open book, as if I had just awakened. It felt peculiar, and I wanted to attribute it to sheer exhaustion. I should really go to bed, I thought to myself. As I rose from my seat, a sudden scratching sound caught my attention. I turned to look. It seemed to be coming from that window in the room. I stood frozen, my gaze fixed on that window as the scratching sound persisted. Then, to my astonishment, a barrage of loud knocks echoed on my desk. I looked down, nothing other than my book still laying open. The scratching noise from the window vanished, and a heavy silence settled in the room. I stood there, immobilized, trying to process the strange events. My heart pounded wildly, and breathing became a struggle. Overwhelmed, I moved towards the door, opened it, stepped out of my room, and made my way to my housemate Sarah's room. As she opened the door, I was in tears. She welcomed me into her room, and I recounted the strange happenings with her. She appeared puzzled, grappled with the effort to understand my narrative. Consoling me, she proceeded to my room for a closer look. Despite her thorough search, she couldn't identify anything out of the ordinary. I informed her that I intended to sleep on the couch in the common area. She understood, agreeing that it would be the best option for the night. Gathering pillows and a blanket from my room, I settled in for the rest of the night just outside with my room door closed. Surprisingly, Sarah decided to join me. In the 20 or so minutes before drifting to sleep, I couldn't shake the profound and disturbing sense of a haunting presence. Each passing day seemed to bring a growing struggle, making it increasingly challenging to come to terms with reality. The next morning wasn't any less unnerving. From the moment I woke up, I felt a sense of unease. I was tired and exhausted, but I had to continue with morning classes. I spent less than a minute in my dorm room before leaving, swiftly gathering my books. Class for the day had begun and the professor started his lecture. Everyone, including myself, were taking notes. As the lecture continued, I heard the girl beside me asking something. I turned to look and respond, but she appeared to be focused on taking notes. She glanced over at me briefly and then returned her attention back to the professor. As I faced forward, I caught sight of a wispy, dark figure in the corner of the room. Near immediately, I started hearing strange voices around me. Heart racing, I closed my eyes in hopes it would go away. But when opening, the figure was still there. No one else seems to see it. I didn't want to wait around. As quietly as I could, I collected my belongings and swiftly left class. Nearly crying, I pulled out my cell phone and dialed my parents. This was the first time I had called them with such a concern. My dad answered. His voice then brought me to crying, right there in the middle of the hall. Luckily, everyone was in class at this time. As clearly as I could, I explained I was scared and needed to leave. Confused, he asked me to slow down, trying to grasp with the situation. I told him I was being stalked and followed and I didn't feel safe. After calming down and speaking with my family, we decided to book my flight out that night. The plan was to address the situation with the college administration department at a later time. I waited outside Elijah's class for him to finish. I needed someone to assist me while I grabbed some important items from my dorm room. While making our way back to our residence, I explained to him that I was going back home for a little while. Though as understanding as he was shocked about how abrupt it was. I didn't go into detail of what I was experiencing with Elijah or my other housemates. I didn't want others to think I was going insane. I just had explained I wasn't feeling well. Upon arriving at the residence hall, I looked up at my room window. Nothing was there, but I wasn't convinced something wasn't waiting. Elijah opened the door and entered our main common area. I followed. There was an intense feeling of despair I couldn't shake off. When walking to my dorm room, I felt a growing, disturbing presence. I listened to see if I could hear something on the other side of the door, but it was silent. I put my hand on the doorknob and opened the door. I slowly creaked the door open while gazing into the opening room. To my horror, as I looked towards the desk, there was a black, wispy yet human-like figure sitting there. It glanced over at me while holding a pencil and writing something on the desk. Shocked, I fell back and tripped over a small end table we had in the common area. Elijah quickly came to my aid as I hit the floor and asked what happened. "Someone's in there," I said. Elijah went over, opened the rest of the door, stepped inside, and looked around. but he didn't notice anything odd. Slowly but hesitantly, I entered my room. Elijah's presence inside the room greatly helped me feel at ease. I had my gaze down and focused on what was important. I began hearing sounds of writing on the desk where the figure was. I kept my head tilted to not see what was there. Elijah and I exited the room. Elijah closed the door behind him upon my request. Just before the door had closed, I heard some final knocks on the desk. Hastily, I made my way out of the building. Just as we stepped outside, I hugged and thanked Elijah. I apologized for how odd I'd been acting. He said not to worry about it and to only get better. He had to go to his next class and I couldn't bother asking for more. Following that, I headed my way to a restaurant off campus to eat, wait for the taxi my father had scheduled, and get some distance from that dark, ghostly apparition. I do feel fortunate to have such a great dad, but I can't help but feel I had let him down at that moment. The way to and the time at the restaurant went without any surprises to my relief, and after having eaten some food and letting my nerves calm down a bit, I was feeling better. I called my parents to update them of what's going on just as the taxi pulled in front of the restaurant. I then took off to the airport and flew back home to rejoin my family. The haunting presence that had engulfed me seemed to fade as I grew nearer home. The travel back was relaxing, and I was able to catch some good sleep on the plane. My family welcomed me, and I was surprised on how welcoming and excited they were to see me. Only over a week had passed, and they missed me to death. I teared up as I embraced them. Quite some time has passed since that autumn. I did end up re-enrolling and completing a graduate course at another university, all thanks to my family's amazing support. I sensed that my achievements as an adult also brought them a sense of pride. However, days don't pass without their challenges. While I cope much better with the memory, I can't help but avoid looking into dark spaces, fearing I might see her or something I would rather not encounter. At times, I feel I hear her whisper to me, but I disregard it as my imagination. The lingering questions I'm still left with today are, why did this happen to me? Why weren't others affected by it? Did it continue to haunt the next person going into that room, or does it still linger in that room this day, sitting at that desk, waiting for the next student to torment?